Join the Coven. Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering my listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/GothicRose and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title for free and start listening. It's that easy. Just go to audibletrial.com/GothicRose to get started today. I'm a guard stationed at a secret government prison. A story written by Mr. Outlaw. Part 5. Task Force Void Nova Hammer. Most of the guards I knew were just dying to see them in action. I was the odd one out in that regard. Well, they were here now, and those guards were too dead to see them. I'm sorry, that was a really distasteful joke. I guess Adrian's presence has rubbed off on me just a tiny bit. Speaking of Adrian, he was feverishly fumbling around in his pockets while keeping his eyes glued on the monitor. After a few moments, he tossed a bag of white powder onto the table. Astro Coke? I asked. He shook his head. Nah, just the regular stuff. The show's not at its climax yet. Gotta pace myself. He snorted the whole mount in about half a minute. Yo, he grunted, wiping his nose off. You fellas want to hear a secret? I don't think we had a choice. Task Force, Void Nova, whatever. How do you think the members got recruited? I shrugged. Dunno. Same kind of test, I guess? He guffawed. Nah, they're voids as well. My mouth dropped. As he went on to explain, TFVNH was a constantly rotating team comprised of voids, save for a few exceptions, who were a reasonable balance of both powerful and sane. In fact, different countries occasionally lent their own voids to one another to use for their respective forces in exchange for their service. The members would be allowed to live freely amongst society, although they were monitored heavily while doing so. You sure know a lot of confidential stuff, Sandu said to Adrian. Just who the hell are you? Adrian sat back in the seat. Nobody. Just a dabbler, a jack of all trades, master of a good handful. He sure was insufferable. In any case, I put my sights back on the monitor as Bella struggled against the seemingly insurmountable foe. She tried blasting him with the blade spray, but before she could even raise her hand, it was broken with a single firm grasp. Son of a... She spat, the life draining from her breath with every word. As Adrian would go on to tell us, this particular TFVNH member was Kente, the Guillotine Sanders, 6'6", 197 centimeters, 287 pounds, 130 kilograms. Supposedly, he was a real jerk. An abnormally powerful man with an incredibly skewed and strict sense of justice. To him, the word nuance meant nothing. Rehabilitation was a joke. Second chances were an alien concept. He was a man whose worldview was utterly black and white. To him, the laws that landed himself in prison didn't constitute legitimate justice. His ideals were the only ones that mattered. Cross his sensibilities and you were a criminal in desperate need of execution. He's got a pretty notorious reputation in these parts, Adrian continued. He's captured at least 7 of the voids in here himself, nearly killed all of them as well. Honestly, I'm not rooting for him to win. Gonna be too hard to wrangle in afterwards. Just as Bella looked about ready to pass out, Kente was blindsided by a sudden rush from Luz. Well, I guess blindsided wasn't really the right term. Kente blocked his strike with relative ease. There's the revenge customer numero uno, Adrian said. The big guy wiped out Luz's entire village before dragging him into this place. No wonder he's ticked. For the first time, Luz had a fierce expression on his face. He let out a rage-laden shriek before digging both of his hands into the only exposed part of Kente's body, his neck, lighting up the area, and his face with sparks. Oh boy, that ain't gonna work, Adrian muttered, grinning. Kente grunted, seemingly taking the full brunt of the excessive shock without going down, before grabbing both of Luz's arms and slamming him into the floor. He dropped Bella in the process, who immediately ran off with her life. Gah. Adrian clicked his tongue in disdain. She's not even helping him out. Guess that's women for you. Sandhu and I kind of just glanced at each other awkwardly following the comment. Unfortunately, Luz's rage just wasn't enough for him to fulfill his revenge. While still on the ground, Kente stomped on his head, crushing it like a watermelon. Quite the gruesome sight to behold. Afterwards, he set his sights on Wu, who'd been observing the whole exchange. Finally, Adrian said, the strong are going at it. For a moment, Wu and Kente both seemed to acknowledge each other's power, hesitating for just a moment. And then, in a flash, they rushed each other simultaneously. Both of their opening moves were kicks, catching each other's respective legs in mid-air, causing the walkway beneath them to crack underneath their combined pressure. On top of possessing overwhelming strength, they were both apparently skilled in martial arts as well, a terrifying combination. But Wu possessed another more devastating aspect on top of it all. Actual weapons. Wu dropped his leg, opting to blast Kentry with a flurry of shotgun rounds instead. It was enough to send him flying backwards, breaking apart the torso section of his suit. And he didn't give him a second to breathe. Wu rushed forward immediately after grabbing Kente's helmet and slamming it down on his knee, shattering it completely. He attempted to decapitate him on the spot with the saw, but Kente caught the slash before it could land. He looked up at Wu, his dark eyes twisted with rage. He broke the saw in half before delivering a powerful-looking right cross to Wu's stomach that splintered a portion of his suit and sent him crashing into the rails. He managed to crack the damn thing, I thought, astonished at the fact that meant at a minimum Kente's punches packed more stopping power than an M203 grenade. Oh, he's getting serious, Adrian smiled. You know what they call his striking technique? What? The pulverizing fist. He twists his knuckles at the last moment, grinding flesh to a pulp. With his strength, it's like drilling through wet toilet paper. But that's only for regular people. Doesn't work on big boys like Wu. The armor covering Kente's knuckles had shattered upon the impact. He winced in pain as he cocked it back, preparing to deliver another strike. You're an impediment to justice, he said through gritted teeth. Prepare to be executed. But before the two could clash again, 5 more figures jumped down from the hole that Satanbot had created, landing in succession around Kente. He began giving us a rundown of the other TFVNH members. First off, there was Ken the Fugitive Rio. 6'2", 188 centimeters, 165 pounds, 75 kilograms. A Korean American from Brooklyn. Not a super malicious guy. He kinda just did whatever the hell he wanted. Problem is, a lot of those things happen to be illegal and unethical, let's be honest. He was nonchalantly chewing tobacco as he leaned on the rails. His ability was rather interesting. Even Adrian had a hard time explaining it. Physically speaking, Ken was more or less average. However, he had the ability to summon portals from which obscure-looking but terribly powerful entities would emerge and tear apart his opponents. But at the end of the day, all that he really wanted to do was escape. He hated being monitored. Next, there was Nassar, the Bloody Twister El Rafi, 5'9", 174 centimeters, 168 pounds, 76 kilograms. He was a loan from the Saudi Arabian government. He possessed the ability to transform into a whirlwind comprised of a glass-like material, moving at speeds upwards of 120 miles an hour, along with being able to blast out deadly streams of shards at multiple targets at once. It was quite the gruesome way to go out. He was also a real weird guy. While nearly every other void assigned to TFVNH had relatively clear ambitions, his were an absolute mystery. But he probably wasn't up to anything good. His eyes were darting wildly around while a gigantic, mischievous-looking grin was plastered across his face. Next up, there was Callista, the beautiful demon tailor, 5'11", 181 centimeters, 121 pounds, 55 kilograms. She was a former fashion model based in Australia. Her career ended at the ripe age of 23, when she ended up suddenly murdering 4 of her fellow models, along with the police force sent to detain her. Supposedly, her abilities had been latent from birth, gradually building up to a point where she was unable to keep it in any longer. In her demon mode, her mouth would fall abnormally agape. Dark rings would form around her pupils, and her body would be engulfed in cold, gray flames. At that point, she had become intangible, like a ghost, and drift into her victims' bodies, causing them to bleed profusely from every orifice. But that only worked on humans. For most voids, she'd have to resort to physical brawling using her razor-like fingers. Her ambitions were fairly explicit. She just wanted to kill everybody, void or not. It begged the question as to why they'd even assign her to the force to begin with, given the fact that she was so damn volatile. Whatever, I'll never understand these people. She was staring intently at Nassar, but without any real emotion behind her gaze. It kind of looked like she just wanted to kill him for the sake of it. Continuing on, there was Clint, the normal guy Rockwell, 6'1", 185 centimeters, 180 pounds, 82 kilograms. Like Nassar, he was also a mystery. Supposedly he had never been a void at all. No otherworldly powers or abilities. Just a regular, albeit capable guy. Adrian didn't know much about him, only that he was a special case, granted access to confidential information and a spot on TFVNH due to a recommendation from an unnamed higher-up. In order to compensate for his lack of physical abilities, he was granted an oversized power suit, dubbed the Behemoth, along with the God-slaying cannon, a heavy-duty automatic rifle that fired explosive rounds at 600 RPM. He stood still with a rather determined expression on his face, as if he had his mind set on a singular, concrete objective. Rounding out the bunch was the de facto leader of the force, Jack, the All-American Barnes. 6 foot, 183 centimeters, 200 pounds, 91 kilograms. Like Clint, he wasn't a void either, born in Oklahoma and belonging to a prolific family. He was an inexhaustibly skilled soldier turned government agent that managed to work his way up to the top with the help of some nepotism. Eventually, he was chosen as the inaugural subject of a project dubbed the Paragon Trials, in which government scientists would attempt to genetically engineer superhumans. Well, he wasn't actually the first, but that's what he was told for peace of mind. In any case, his trials ended up working out in the end. I guess the 8th time was really the charm. As a result, he was basically Superman, save for the flight. Genetic engineering hadn't advanced that far yet. "Man, look at those blonde curls," Adrian commented. "How the hell does he get his hair like that?" He had an arrogant grin on his face as he strolled to the front of the pack. It only took me 5 seconds of looking at him to reach the conclusion that he was probably a giant jerk. "What's the rush, Kente? Let's not get too excited here," Jack said. "Remember who's giving the orders, yeah? Your arbitrary orders mean nothing to me." Kente responded, still staring vehemently at Wu. "The only thing that matters is justice." I could see a large vein bulge out on Jack's forehead from the opposition. "Okay," he muttered before seemingly composing himself. "Let's finish the task at hand." He directed his gaze towards Wu. "Come on, big guy. You lost your chance at a fair fight when you decided to become a robot psycho." While Wu may have been a match for Kente by himself, taking on the entirety of TFVNH at once was a rather tall order. I guess he knew this himself, as he jumped over the rails, landing on the lower floor. "I'm going after him," Jack said, stepping forward. "The rest of you take out the riffraff. They want the voids alive, but I'm going to be sorely disappointed if you don't bring me back some freaking minced meat." That was one thing him and Kente could agree on. "And remember," he said, turning back. His expression was suddenly teeming with fury. "You are all scum. Voids as well. You try to escape, try to mess with me, and you're going to be begging me to end your pathetic lives." He pointed at Ken. "You stay here. Make sure nobody tries escaping through the roof." Instead of acknowledging the order, Ken just spat his tobacco into a plastic bottle. "Hey, you listening to me? Japanese? Remember when we beat you in the war?" "Isn't he Korean?" Clint muttered. Ken just raised an eyebrow at the remark. "Dude, I don't even know how to respond to that." "Look, whatever. Just listen to me, alright?" Jack screamed. Ken grinned sarcastically and made a defensive gesture. "Okay, boss." Jack's forehead vein bulged out even more. It was starting to really look pretty gross. "Alright, let's go then." After finishing his motivational speech, he jumped down, presumably going after Wu. Save for Ken, the rest of the TFVNH followed suit, scattering throughout the chasm in search for the remaining voids. The strong were finally about to converge on one bloody path. As dark, weird, and gruesome as the whole situation was, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little bit excited to see what was about to transpire. Part 6. God, I can't even keep my eyes still, Adrian said, beaming at the prospect of utter carnage ahead. My eyes ended up drifting towards the dancing guy, who was joyously performing the shuffle along a second-floor walkway. Soon enough, he crossed paths with Nassar, who was grinning like a madman. Without much hesitation, he stepped forward, heading right towards the dancer. Well, I guess it's over for him, I said. I had yet to hear about anybody being able to inflict any kind of damage against the dancing guy. The only thing that we could really do was contain him, and I severely doubted that things were going to be any different here. I'm not sure, Adrian responded. The guy's a wild card. I think he's just testing the waters here. Before I knew it, Nassar had gotten dangerously close. I held my breath in anticipation. There's no way, I thought. And I was right. Nassar tried to strike the dancer, but was blitzed immediately. I could hardly even comprehend what had even happened. One moment, he was in the midst of throwing a right cross. The next, he was planted firmly within the concrete wall, missing an arm with a gaping hole in his chest. Holy! He spurted out. He looked towards the dancer, still inexplicably grinning. Damn, you're strong! What the hell's wrong with him? I wondered out loud. Nothing at all, Adrian answered. I think I found a kindred spirit. Nassar pulled himself out of the crater he had made, displaying zero indication that he was in any kind of pain at all. Suddenly, a flurry of glass engulfed his chest wound and missing arm, reverting them back to normal in a matter of seconds. He stretched himself out before nodding happily at the dancer and walking off. What the hell? I thought. I looked over at Sandhu, wanting to see his own reaction, but he was stone-like, staring at only one monitor in particular. I followed his eyes and realized that for whatever reason, he was focused on the kid, who was still sitting in his cell. Check it out! My thoughts were broken by Adrian's outburst. She found her prey. I looked at the monitor he was gesturing to, seeing Kale and Hugo being hacked away at by Callista.
Now who the hell is she?
Kale shouted, taking a sequence of gnarly gashes to the chest. Evil incarnate, Hugo answered. Although still severely injured, he was able to move around on his own. Look at her eyes. She's being controlled by the devil. Castella drilled her hand forward, impaling Kale through the solar plexus. He chopped at her arm before pushing her off.
Damn,
he sighed.
This is back-breaking work.
Are you a match for her? Hugo asked. Kale shook his head, exhausted as hell.
Doubt it.
In that case, Hugo said, standing up, it seems like I'll have to detach myself fully.
What the hell are you talking about?
My constraints were only lifted halfway the last time.
You almost died last time as well. You sure you're gonna make it out this time?
I'm not planning to. Kale chuckled.
Sorry, but I'm not gonna let you do that.
Hugo's eyes began glowing a familiar crimson. I've been ordained a holy mission. I'll do whatever it takes. He stared at the rapidly approaching Callista. Anything to eliminate evil. His scars began glowing again, brighter than ever this time, preparing to engage the oncoming enemy. But before they could clash, Kale stepped in between and tanked another series of slashes before kicking her back.
Ugh,
He grunted.
damn, that hurt.
What are you doing? Hugo asked, perplexed. I told you, this is...
Yeah, your God-given whatever. I don't know, buddy. You're a psycho, but for whatever reason, I don't really want you to die.
Kale gave him a bloody grin.
It feels like we've been through a lot, you know?
For a moment, it seemed as if Hugo was at a loss for words. But then Callista stood back up. I see, he said. But what are we gonna do about her? Kale looked down and sighed.
Yeah, that's the real question, ain't it?
Kale clenched his teeth as Callista began charging at them once again. Looks like Lady Luck's on their side today, Adrian said. I realized what he meant when one of Callista's hands were bitten straight off by the chattering man, who strolled into the fray from an adjacent corridor.
Well, hell.
Kale said, watching the two suddenly preoccupied with each other.
Looks like God is looking out for us.
He grinned at Hugo, who simply nodded back as the two got the heck out of Dodge. Callista and the chattering man began relentlessly butchering each other. Using her remaining hand, she made 2 quick slashes in succession, tearing open his chest and forehead. In response, the chatterer bit a good portion of her shoulder off. This went on for a few minutes until about half of Callista's body remained and about 90% of the chatterer's skin had been shredded off, staining the entire area a gory red. But even demonic superhumans had their limits. They were both beginning to slow down. Callista twisted her bloody knife-like fingers, pushing them into the chattering man's mouth and through his throat. While it was still lodged inside, she threw her arm upwards, splitting his head apart. But at the exact same time, the chattering man swiped at her head, twisting her neck clean off. They both fell simultaneously as combatants who fought to the bloody end. It was by far the most brutal bout I had seen thus far, although there was certainly some fierce competition for that battle. I decided to check back on the voids that were still contained. The Titan was still in his cell. The Calamity's light also remained green. The kid hadn't stepped out either. But then, there was the warden. Clint had stepped into his cell, donning the behemoth suit in all of its destructive glory. Wearing it brought them roughly up to the same size. Still, he was just an ordinary guy going up against an unfairly powerful monster. Unless he had some tricks up his sleeve, this was about to get really messy, really quick. Hey, he said, grinning at the warden through his fortified visor. You've been chasing me all this time. Thought I'd finally come to you instead. Sounds like they have unfinished business, Adrian said. That much was probably true. Still staring down at the blood-stained floor, the warden simply let out a deep, lengthy sigh. Then he finally looked up. There was nothing in his pit-like eyes but sheer rage. "Your death won't be quick." His voice was deeper than the Mariana's. Before Clint could even get his guard up, he was brutally blitzed by a sudden rush. The warden was moving so fast, he was effectively a blur. Clint was launched backwards, denting a metal wall. The warden bolted at him again, slashing off pieces of his suit with nothing but his fingers. He launched his fist at Clint's protective visor, smashing it to bits and cutting his face up with lots of stray glass in the process. However, Clint managed to push him off before it could connect with his skull, which could have been beyond fatal. "Damn!" he spat, attempting to unsheath the oversized blade at his side. But he wasn't nearly quick enough. The warden grabbed it by the edge before Clint could even swing, shattering it into fine dust with nothing but a firm grasp. And he grabbed the suit by the arm, slamming Clint so hard to the ground, causing him to spit out blood. "Man," Adrian muttered, "this is even hard for me to watch." The warden proceeded to uncompromisingly wail away on top of him, with Clint barely managing to protect his face with the suit's wrist guards, but even those were being chipped away at really quickly. Just as there was about an inch of suit left covering his arms, he tilted his elbow towards the warden's neck, firing off a small grenade that caused the overpowered void to stagger just a little. The warden retreated, touching the small wound that the explosion had left under his skin. In turn, Clint struggled to pull himself up, with the suit looking like it had been run over by a dozen freight trains. His face was covered in blood and cuts, while a blood vessel had popped in his right eye. Yet he shot the warden a gory smirk. "Okay, maybe I deserve that, but the comeback starts now." He opened a compartment on the suit's rib cage, taking out something that resembled a small, white crystal. "Remember these?" he asked, before using it to cut himself on an exposed portion of his wrist. The warden's face twisted into an unfathomable expression of fury. He rushed forward again, tackling Clint into another wall, before ripping off a large chunk of the suit's torso. And then he drilled his fist into Clint's ribcage. At that moment, I was 100% sure he was done for. But to my downright surprise, he managed to tank the punch, grimacing only slightly. "What'd you think?" he asked the warden, still grinning. "We ran some experiments. These shards are new and improved." The warden let out an ear-splitting shriek that I was surprised didn't deafen Clint on the spot, before picking him up and tossing him back into the cell. He followed him in, picking his head up and bashing his temple about 10 times into the metal toilet seat before it ended up breaking from the force. As a result, one side of Clint's face was beginning to resemble a bloody mush. Still, I was surprised it hadn't been reduced to pulp. "What the hell was that shard?" I thought to myself. He also seemed to have picked up a bounce in his step, evading another strike from the warden and crawling behind him. At that point, the behemoth had effectively been reduced to scrap metal. Clint dove towards the god-slaying cannon, which had been knocked loose during their scuffle. He scooped it up and began spraying it at the ward's direction. However, he managed to evade just about every shot, leaving large clouds of smoke and dust behind him as the devastating bullets reduced the place to rubble. "You're a tough customer," Clint groaned as he flipped a switch on the weapon. "Take this then." The barrel of the weapon suddenly grew in size, causing it to resemble an actual cannon. As he pulled the trigger, the monitor darkened for just a moment before a flash of deep red engulfed the area and a high-pitched staccato of wholly unfamiliar noises assaulted my senses. I kept watching as the recoil from the strange blast pushed Clint's back into the wall, as it completely alienated the entire other side of the room. The weapon itself was also destroyed in the process. I guess the god-slaying cannon got an upgrade, 'cause I sure as hell didn't know how it could do that. After the smoke cleared, everything was silent for a few moments. Clint grinned, letting out a big sigh of relief. And then his face dropped a few seconds later. As the rubble began stirring, the warden burst out, with about half of his entire body now charred to hell. He also had a wicked, psychotic grin on his face. It was the first time I had seen him make any kind of overt expression at all. I could have lived without it, though. "You took everything from me," he said, walking ominously towards the nearly broken Clint. "But I have to admit, this has been a hell of a fun time." Clint groaned, reaching into his pant leg pocket. He pulled out 2 syringes filled with black and blue liquids respectively. "Come on, painkillers, don't let me down," he muttered before injecting the blue. But just as he was about to inject the black, the warden clutched his hand, crushing it along with the syringe. "More tricks?" he sneered, his eyes wild as all hell. "I guess that's what the weak resort to." Clint simply laughed. "You're not so smart when you're angry, huh? It's in my blood now." The warden released the grip, revealing Clint's bloody, cut up and mangled hand. However, the black substance was already seeping into his wounds. "What is that?" the warden asked. "A gift from a good friend. Also, my last resort. Didn't want to use it now, but I guess I'm out of options." In a matter of seconds, nearly all of Clint's wounds had healed up. Along with that, his muscles had become visibly tensed. "That's impossible," the warden gritted his teeth. "That's one thing I've learned," Clint responded, smiling wide as he stepped forward. "Nothing's really impossible." He stepped forward, throwing a hard strike at the warden's chest, sending him crashing back into the rubble. Clint looked down at his fist in surprise. "Nice," he grinned, but he had no time to appreciate his newfound power. The warden rose back up like a wild animal in a frantic pursuit of its prey. "You're weak," he boomed. "I will never lose to you. Nature won't allow it." Clint chuckled. "You're right. I am weak. Must suck for your ego, huh?" The warden shrieked before charging back at Clint. Once there, they engaged in a fierce exchange of blows, rocking the place to its core. While Clint's physical attributes had been enhanced greatly by whatever serum he had taken, there was still an evident gap in strength between them, with each of the warden's blows ostensibly packing more force than his own. However, he did have one advantage. He was clearly trained extensively in hand-to-hand combat. while the warden was an amateur at best. He dodged a series of haymakers before countering with a flurry of jabs and kicks of his own. At that point, the warden's mannerisms had devolved into that of a feral creature's, fueled solely by the combative impulse, yet I could see the same wicked grin creeping in throughout his wild rage. He was undoubtedly enjoying the adrenaline. The warden picked Clint up by the waist, slamming him into the wall, and then onto the ground. He then mounted him, unleashing a series of hammer fists that Clint was forced to excruciatingly block with his forearms. Soon enough, his skin was beginning to tear off from the punishment. While on the ground, Clint managed to throw a kick that connected with the warden's hip. However, he hardly got any reaction out of it. He simply wasn't strong enough. Instead, the warden threw both fists into Clint's ribs. I could hear them crack through the monitor. He grimaced in pain, but the warden didn't give him a moment to recuperate. He drilled a fist right into the side of his face. A spurt of blood and a few teeth flew out of his mouth as his head was cranked to the side. "He's gonna be freaking done for," Adrian commented. I had to share the sentiment. Clint's efforts were more than admirable. He sure as hell put out a better fight than I could have ever hoped to. But even with all his tools, tricks, and skills, he was still no match. At least, that was what I genuinely believed. But the guy was just so full of surprises. After taking another brutal strike to the shoulder, Clint managed to somehow escape out from beneath. I couldn't even fathom what kind of move he pulled in order to do so. And then, in a series of moves that would make the most prolific jiu-jitsu practitioners light up with glee, he engaged the warden in a vicious grappling match on the ground. From his face, I could tell that he was going far above and beyond his own limits. It was down there where the warden's weakness really became clear as day. He had no idea what to do. After an entire minute of relentless, excruciating struggle from both combatants, Clint managed to get the warden into a beautiful Darce choke. As the warden struggled feverishly to escape, Clint's face was wrought with sheer determination. The warden changed his tactics, opting to bound at Clint's already broken ribs in an attempt to cause him to break his hold. This was a bad decision. It only allowed Clint to get his hold even tighter. Despite all of the egregious punishment he had taken, Clint never relented. Soon enough, the warden's movements began slowing down, and then he stopped moving altogether. Even then, Clint didn't release his grasp. He held the warden's neck in place, using all of his strength for about 4 minutes before he finally let go, all the while gasping in accumulated pain and exhaustion. The guy really looked as if he was going to die on the spot. But that didn't matter to him. The fight was finished. An unlikely victor had emerged with a tired grin on his face. He raised a shaky fist in victory before passing out himself. "Well, I'm touched," Adrian said. "It's like watching Rocky all over again." On another monitor, Bella had made her way back to the top floor, back to the gaping exit. "Wow, what a pleasant surprise," Ken said, standing in her way. She seemed to share the surprise as they stared at each other. "Is this a joke?" she responded. Ken shrugged. "Where else was I gonna see you? Are you going to let me go?" she asked.
If I did, the American boy would track me down and kick my butt. I gotta wait till he dies first. Then we can go off into the sun together.
He smiled.
In the meantime, you want to talk for a bit?
She sighed.
What do you think's going on here? I don't know,
Ken responded.
That's up to you. You already know how I feel. I tried to assassinate you. You were contracted to assassinate me by a massive jerk. I'm sure it was nothing personal. Oh my God.
She sighed again.
Besides,
Ken continued,
I'm still alive. Maybe you didn't really want to kill me. That's what I tell myself anyway. You're insane if you think anything's going to happen between us. You think I want to date anybody right now? Well, I never wanted to either before I met you.
A period of silence followed.
Let's face it,
Ken spoke up.
We're bad people living bad lives. Don't you get tired of it? Speak for yourself,
Bella responded.
You know what kind of people I kill? I'm not talking about that. You want to escape, don't you? I don't belong in here. A lot of people don't. What are you getting at? I'm pretty sure you know. The kid. Yeah? What about him?
Ken exhaled.
Look, forget about dating. But don't you ever feel like doing something good for once? Doing something for anybody besides yourself?
Bella simply rolled her eyes in response.
I'm sorry, that came out badly.
She stepped forward, brushing past him.
I'm leaving now. If you want to try and stop me, then go ahead. I'll just kick your butt again.
There was another pause before Ken shook his head.
You know I'm not gonna do that. Good.
She began walking off.
I'm not tired of anything, by the way,
she said without turning around.
I'm in control of my own life, and I kind of enjoy that.
She left Ken looking somewhat melancholic, but eventually he began smiling again.
Of course you do.
He took off, abandoning his post, but I'm sure he hardly cared about that. Well, geez, that was a downer, Adrian said. Let's get back to the exciting stuff, he grinned. The final chips are starting to fall into place. Jack had finally found Wu.
You China's secret weapon or something?
He asked, approaching the mechanical menace who remained silent.
Doesn't matter,
he continued, clenching his fists.
America's always on top.
Look up there as well. I turned to the monitor that Adrian was gesturing towards, watching as Kente continued roaming the corridors, still clenching his teeth in justice-driven rage. Actually, no, he wasn't roaming anymore. He was walking towards somebody. But at first, I didn't recognize who it was.
Come at me!
But I did recognize the voice. It was Senju, his head now resembling a glowing, floating skull shrouded in a dark haze. Didn't he die? I asked, confused. Adrian chuckled. Don't you know anything about the Wraith style? One of its core proponents is the revival technique. Of course, I thought, how could I not know that?
You killed everybody at my dojo!
Senju screamed at the approaching Kente.
You're dead!
Kente bit down even harder, cracking his own teeth.
I simply enacted justice, and I've waited for too long to finish the job.
Man, how lucky are we to find this place? Adrian said. Crisp front row seats. It took me a moment to process the implications of what he had just said. What the hell are you talking about? I asked him. In turn, he looked at me like I was insane. What do you mean? Didn't you build this place? He shook his head. Well, if you didn't, then who? My eyes wandered up to Sandu, whose attention was still firmly planted on the kid. He's the one that led me into this room to begin with. I do remember thinking it was rather strange, but with everything that had been going on, I forgot to question it further. But now I couldn't avoid it. What the hell is going on?